Beyond the Hood, stories and strategies to fuel dealer growth.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond the Hood with Tractor Zoom. I'm your host, Andy Campbell, and my guest today is George Keene. If you're interested in how to turn your data into profit for your equipment dealerships, making smarter inventory decisions and sales strategies, this episode is focused on you. In my conversation with George today, which is part of a larger 3-part series, we talk specifically about managing aged inventory, reducing obsolete stock, effective inventory management strategies, and then we get into the data talking about leveraging data to improve sales and inventory utilization. Let's jump right to my conversation with George Keene. Now, we had just talked about the importance of the CRM system and just the processes and the management of executing the strategy, which at the core basic gets down to data. How is it structured? How is it organized? And I mean, you had plenty of years at a DMS company, and then every other position after that, I'm sure you dealt with data and data utilization. So how do you put that dealer data ship to work? And maybe a more pointed question is, what common data sets within dealerships do you think are overlooked, underutilized, or potential gold mines?
Well, I think as the current economy is so questionable what's going on, I think we need to look at some of the data for salespeople and consider what's the purchasing cycle for an account. Do we have a farmer that buys every 7 years or every 10 years? Now, it may be different cycles for tractors than it is for implements. Okay, but what's the purchase cycle for an account? And to do that, you got to go back in history. You got to look at your data. So you've got a dealership that's in the 3rd generation. They've been on a computer software system for the last 50 years. So let's go back to, we're only 25 years into the 21st century. Mm-hmm. We go back to 75, and there were some computer software.
Yeah.
But 40 or 50 years. But let's look back at all the invoices of what we've sold to that account during that last 40 or 50 years. How many tractors did we sell? What size? What model? Etc. What implements have we sold? What's the replacement cycle for those accounts? So I want to use the historic data of the account to prompt the salesperson on when they need to plan the next tractor or implement sale. Likewise, based on the history, does the customer buy new or do they buy used? And what equipment do we currently have, especially with this tariff culture that we're dealing with right now? If the customer has bought new in the past, but we have late model, well-maintained equipment on the lot outside, should that be something that we're pushing to the customer because tariff is not going to impact used equipment predominantly? If anything, it's going to drive the price up.
Right.
Okay. But the customer doesn't have a tariff charge on used equipment. So is that the type of value that that customer would like to pay? And now, it's not going to be the same answer for every customer, but, is that something else to think of? So we get to look at the turnover cycle for our customers. Is there any way to look at turnover cycle for prospects? Could be.
How would you
Could
do
be
that?
quotations. If we have quotations that long ago, if we've been calling on that account and keeping records, we might have, quoted work, quoted equipment that didn't sell. But that's the reason we have CRMs.
Which gets to the importance of data governance and collecting good data. And
Yes.
not just being, transactional with the data and just using it for the here and now and then shoving
Right.
it in a closet.
Right.
Okay. How would you use that call data, getting to maybe tariffs or a changing environment? How would you use any of that historical call data plus whatever else is externally streaming in to adjust call frequency? Or would you?
I'm probably going to make a comment here that's not going to be comfortable to everyone. But as I said, my normal approach is to put more calls in the large accounts, less calls in the small accounts. So one question would be, how many pieces of equipment does an account have? Now, you probably need to balance that between tractors and implements.
Mhm.
But, how many acres do they have? How many tractors do they have? How many implements do they have? Where are you going to put your effort? Because one guy has the potential to buy one tractor a year. Somebody else has the potential to buy 12 tractors a year. Well, I definitely want to go with the amount of calls and the effort into that large account. So I want to look at it. There's a strong relationship between the revenue volume and potential, the number of pieces of equipment, and generally the number of acres.
Okay, so I've got a specific question on that because this conversation actually just came up with a colleague of mine here at TractorZoom and then a dealer that we're working with. How many dealerships do you think have great data on their customers in terms of the customer's fleet and the number of acres?
I think the number's small. I don't have any specific information on it, but I think unfortunately the amount of dealers that have good information is limited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. But doesn't make that data any less valuable. In fact, it probably makes it more valuable because it's a rare commodity.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, a quick break from the show, and then we're going to get you right back to the conversation. But I wanted to take a moment to let you know how TractorZoom is partnering with all of our dealership partners to fuel their dealership growth. We're doing that with TractorZoom Pro to give people better valuations, faster access to it, and the ability to manage their inventory using AI, using large data. Even if their dealership doesn't have the capacity to develop the AI and the large data themselves, it's all there within TractorZoom Pro. And also with Anvil Pro, integrated business systems solution. You can actually cut costs by integrating solutions, not paying for all these extra one-offs, and keep people in the same solution so you're not constantly switching screens. And then you could optimize your workflows, do a lot of things with automation that technology should be able to do right now. So just two ways that TractorZoom is working with our dealer partners to really help them fuel their dealership growth. Okay, you can check out some links in the show notes. You can also go to TractorZoomPro.com to check all that stuff out. But we'd love to at least show you all the different ways that we're helping our dealership partners. Okay, let's get back to the show. Hope you're enjoying it. And speaking of those successes, those metrics that you really want to measure so that you can manage, what are some of your favorite metrics or reports that help you see whether a dealership is gaining ground or maybe losing touch with profitability? What do you look at?
I generally come into a dealership looking for what I call critical variables. Critical variables are a set of metrics, benchmarks, in every department. I want to know generally 5. I want to know market share or revenue growth from last year. I want to know financial performance. So for that department, I want to know net profit and gross profit. I want to know what the employee productivity is. We've been talking sales department so far this morning. In the sales department, I want to know what the gross profit dollars are by salesperson every month. And I say that because, and some of that's going to be different if I'm doing a, a dealership that sells strongly to consumers and homeowners and things like that. It's going to be different than it is for somebody in Nebraska who's selling mostly large farm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but what is a good, consistent gross profit dollar amount per salesperson? And I say that because one salesperson can sell at 11% gross profit and another sells at 20% gross profit. But the salespeople still have a certain expected income. We still have benefits we have to pay. We still have taxes we have to pay. We still have transportation. We have computers. We have cell phones. We have a lot of expenses by salesperson. So just asking all salespeople to bring the same GP percentage doesn't guarantee to cover expenses. I want to know dollars. I want to know true dollars per month per salesperson because I've got expenses to cover. Now, I was on critical variables: market share, financial, employee productivity, asset management. I want to measure the inventory, the turnover. I want to look at how much obsolete inventory we have. And by obsolete inventory, I mean anything over 12 months old. That is non-productive trapped cash. And my 5th benchmark is I want to know what customer satisfaction score is doing. Now, intentionally, those 5 are a mixture of long-term measurements, things over a 12-month period, like customer satisfaction. Okay, that's not usually just the last month or the last 3 or 4 months. We get customer satisfaction over time, and we can destroy it quickly. We can build it, but building it is not quick. If we've got it up there to 85, 90, 95%, we didn't get it there in the last 2 months. So to me, that's a long-term measurement. Financial is usually under a 1-year number most of the time. We're talking month or year to date. Market share, again, is a long-term measurement. You don't get market share in a 2-month period. You get it over years. You get trusted customers that are coming back to you over and over. So those 5 benchmarks are meant to be a mixture of long-term and short-term measurements.
So on those, the inventory management is near and dear to my heart. And especially now, as we've
Yes.
gone from this past 3 years of having no inventory, then everybody wanted it, to high priced inventory, and then too much high priced inventory, and now
Hmm.
we may be righting the ship, not in all categories though, and many dealerships are still working through some of that aged inventory. Let's first talk about the psychological piece of it. Why is it so hard to move and just get rid of something that is aged, that's obsolete?
Well, you know, hard to get rid of stuff was probably a bad decision to start with. Okay. Who's making the decision to accept trade-ins, and how good are they at evaluating trade-ins before they take them? Okay.
Hmm.
Things that are on our lot for 12 months or more probably should have been a better decision to start with. So, what is the process you use to evaluate inventory? Do you have a checklist? Do you use the resources for something like what you're talking about of what's the auction price? What's the local price? Whatever you're going to use, okay?
Hmm.
How long have you been doing it? Did you do it 24 months ago? Did you do it 36 months ago? And is that the same equipment you have now? Maybe you should go back and change the process.
Hmm.
Maybe you need to evaluate things better. But as we look at this uncertain economy, you may need to look at just unloading equipment. You may
Hmm.
need to start looking at taking cash for what you can get for it and just convert it to cash. May not have profit in it, but you need to get the cash out of it to keep the business functioning. And once you get your inventory down, don't build it again. Okay?
Take a lesson and grow.
In the in the dealership I worked with, the sales manager came in and did a phenomenal job of reducing the used inventory level
Hmm.
and brought it down, but he had a lot of work to convince the owner that we needed to convert things to cash. Some people, owners, sales managers, even salespeople, get emotionally attached to the equipment when they take it in as trade because they made the decision. It's their reputation on the line. They made that decision to bring it in because they thought it would sell. They have trouble accepting that it may not have been a great decision. It's an emotional issue.
Hmm.
Okay, but we've got to have some procedures in place that says used inventory is never going to be higher than X, and used inventory is never going to be in the lot longer than X number of days or months. And when it reaches that point, my humble opinion, you send it out to auction. Okay?
Hmm.
If your dealership takes in a tractor in March, then as of next April, I think it ought to be out of here. Okay? If you can't sell it in the next 12 months based on certain seasonality,
Hmm.
then we need to start getting rid of it. Okay? Because otherwise you're sitting on $40,000, $50,000 that is not anything you can use for anything else. I can't use it for other trade-ins. I can't use it for parts. I can't pay people with it. Okay, you've got cash sitting on the lot, and you've got to do something about it. You need to be strong and make that decision.
So with that convincing then, because you're right, it is a lot of times it's the UEM, the used equipment manager, the sales manager, perhaps trying to convince somebody else that this is the action we need to take. Is our numbers, our math, the best way to do that? Just running a financial model saying, we're going to lose this much if we hold it for longer? Or what persuasive method would you use if you had to go talk to an owner saying, I know we're going to take a $5 million bath on this, but it's worth it?
You've got to have a process in place, and different dealerships are going to have different decisions of when they're going to do it. Some of it has to do with ownership. Some of it has to do with previous experience. I've got one dealer I worked with years ago. His parts department had a very large percentage of dollars that were obsolete. They were obsolete when he bought the other location, and he never did anything about it. And I said, why? He said, I don't want to upset my banking relationship. The bank thinks there's value there, and I don't want to tell them otherwise. Okay, not a great direction.
Yep.
But I understood why he was doing it. So, respecting owners and their approach to their business. What is the owner's or senior management's reason for doing certain things? Can we, using that, can we structure an approach on how to handle parts inventory, used inventory, even new inventory? Okay, what is it we want to accomplish, and what are we going to do about it? Could also be, I know a dealership I'm currently working with that has been in business for 50 plus years and has no debt.
Oh.
Unusual for many dealerships.
Yes.
But over the years, they've paid off everything. When they make a decision, they're making a cash decision, not a finance decision. That has a different impact on what procedures we're going to do. So my point is, it's not one answer that's going to work for everyone. We've got to go back to the dealership and talk about history, experience, strategy. What are we trying to accomplish? From that, we can craft a decision of what to do in the future. I wish it was simple and say everyone should do this.
Right. Well, and if it was, everybody would have done that, and we would not be sitting where we are now. You did mention parts inventory, and as an engineer or a former engineer myself, like I love the idea of the just-in-time efficiency. Delivering things where they need to be, when they need to be, and don't have it just sitting around. But I also farm, and we broke down way too many times this past year, and we were scrambling and driving all over the state to get the part that we needed so we could get back up in time. And again, we didn't know if it was going to snow in October or eventually in December, and then we had time. We just don't know. So that's a little scary. But, from your perspective, how would you manage, restocking levels, transfers, all of that, complex problem that is parts?
Okay. I'm going to try and keep this direct and short because you're touching on an area I'm very involved in or emotionally attached to. I spent years doing some of that. First, the computer system should have a methodology inside of it for looking at history, recommending stocking levels. So what was the stocking logic in the system?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm hoping that first exists. Secondly, in the dealership I worked in, as I said, we had 6 branches. We established a trucking route that went from branch 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. every day. So if we had parts in branch 4 that were needed in branch 1, rather than buy them, we would transfer them by that trucking route, and they would be there tomorrow. So we were attempting to maximize the total inventory from all branches to take care of customers before we bought them again, because we already owned them. One of the bigger issues I find for dealers in almost any industry is frequently our stocking logic is something like, if we get 3 calls or hits within a year, then we stock it.
Mm-hmm.
Our problem is we don't get rid of it quick enough. The stocking logic traditionally has been like no hits in 12 months, then we get rid of it. The manufacturer may have already marked it as non-returnable by that time. We need to consider tightening that get rid of logic. I don't mind the bring it in, but I want to get rid of it before it becomes a problem. And most of our logic in the computer systems has been built to be too lenient on trimming inventory. You got to take that up with the computer software guys.
Yep. Well, I know some.
Yeah.
So, but I love your answer there. And it really ties into a consistency from your overall inventory management of don't let it get obsolete. And then also your earlier suggestion of, hey, use your computer logic. And there's a lot more logic now out with AI as long as you're structured
Yes.
well, to try to predict your levels, but also use a good method of practicality too, of just run a truck and go around. And if you use the two in combination, you're using the best tools at your resource, both in a very, just a truck, gas to move it around, as well as, logic and AI.
Yeah.
Great answer.
I might even suggest that dealers, if you don't have 6 branches or 10 branches or something, do you have other dealers with the same brand within a local area that you could share inventory transfers with? Doesn't have to be the same ownership.
Mm-hmm.
But rather than buying it from the manufacturer over and over and over, could you help another dealer reduce the inventory if you have the demand?
Mm-hmm.
Just another idea.
Yeah.
On the obsolete inventory, anything over 12 months, what I'd like to do with that is run an extended inventory report. I want to rank it from extended value, high to low, similar to what we're talking on large customer accounts and prospect accounts versus volume. I want to do the same thing with parts. I want my obsolete value from largest to smallest, and I want to start at the top. Now, if we're really going to use the computer software that is beginning to get even stronger, can I match that first part number to a model of equipment, and from the model of equipment can identify what customers ever bought that unit, because those are the only customers that would ever want to buy that part.
Mm-hmm.
So I could market that part to just those 4 customers that have that model of equipment. Okay, but it's going to take some reverse engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got to take every part number, run it back through a where used system, tell me this part number is used on which models of equipment, now tell me which models of equipment customers have bought, and now I want to market that part number to only those 4 customers.
Mm-hmm.
It can be done.
Yep.
But it's complex.
It is. And it gets back to what we talked about at the very beginning of well-structured data, knowing either what you've sold or what's on the farmer's farm. Again, a good understanding in
Yep.
order to do what you want to do.
Yep.
And so shifting topics here a little bit, but not too far, because we're talking inventory management or parts management because it ties up cash.
Yes.
And so if we move the discussion in terms of cash flow management in a time in 2025 here where, it's a concern for sure. Do you have any suggestions for dealers who are facing, 10, 20, 30% less cash flow moving through their system this year?
Well, I think the service department is certainly an area that I would want to focus on increasing business, because service has a much higher gross profit, doesn't trap as much cash in inventory, and because it's not a tangible product, in that it's not an equipment unit, it's not parts inventory, I could increase the service business quicker than I could selling more parts or selling more equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And I get more profit from it. So let me use an illustration. If I've got 10 technicians, and if I could improve or get 15 minutes more per day from a technician. Now, 15 minutes, 220 days a year for a technician.
Mm-hmm.
That's dropping all the vacation and all the weekends out. 220 days, 15 minutes, and $125 an hour at published billing rate.
Mm-hmm.
I've got about $5,000 a year per technician for just 15 minutes. Now, by the way, I said 10 technicians, right?
Right.
That's 50,000. And that was just picking up 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could do that by how you round your time. You could do that by not having a technician that clocks in and goes and gets a cup of coffee and checks the newspaper before he goes to work. There's any number of ways to pick up time. The better one is, can I quote a customer for a job? And if I can quote a 4-hour job, but the technician can do it in 3.5, I could pick up half an hour, and the technician could use that half hour for other billing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only worth half an hour of billing extra, it could be worth a full hour.
Yep.
So I like the service department because it's going to improve revenue with the least amount of investment.
Yeah.
The other area I would consider is going into rental. Okay, and by the way, both of these to me are methods of how do we improve our absorption too. But we can come to that separate discussion. Rental could be using equipment which is currently on the lot that is just sitting there idle doing nothing. If I've got a customer that could use it but doesn't want to buy it, could I rent it for a month? It's at least cash that I'm not getting while it just sits there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before you go jumping into rental, if you haven't done it, you need to understand all the ins and outs of it. But if you have the equipment and could rent it, it's potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just met with a dealer down in middle of Texas, and he went from a 3-store case dealer and downsized to a 1-store Kubota. Changed his business model drastically, but he said it's much for the better because of less of the used inventory. And what he does take in, he utilizes fully that rental model that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And he's like, that now his used equipment is making money for him, and then it's out. And he's really streamlined and optimized all those resources in terms of his equipment to make the most money for him, and then not to cost him money because he gets rid of it after that.
Yeah. I did a seminar for Kubota dealers. Oh God, 15 years ago, something like that. And one of the Kubota dealers said, I don't want to get into renting tractors. That's what I sell. Okay. That's his philosophy. But he was renting. But his approach was he would sell you the tractor and then he would rent you the postal digger. He would rent you the boom or whatever else he was renting the attachments instead of the primary product. I liked his creative approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
He felt that he could make more money on the attachments by renting them himself. Think about a rototiller. Keep in mind, I'm going to the consumer side. Okay, but if I spend $1,000 on a rototiller, that's a pretty good rototiller in many cases. But if I put $1,000 into it, and I could rent it for 12 weeks at the beginning of the season, spring, and I could rent it 12 weeks. I'm going to have to do some real booking to make this work. But if I could do 12 weeks at the end of the season in the fall, while they're, closing down the garden and, getting it ready for next year and all that. And if weekly rental is about $260, $270 a week, I'm bringing in about $6,000 a year for those 24 weeks. That's on $1,000 investment. Now, if I could do that for 2 years, I've got $12,000, and now I'm going to sell it for $400 because it's 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good investment for $1,000.
It is. And you're also providing value to the consumer who if they're going to only use it one time for their one garden every year, then they are only paying $200, $250 per time instead of the $1,000, which they may not be able to afford. They don't have to store it. They don't have the storage facility. And so you're providing extra value to them on top of, 6Xing your money.
Yeah. I think rental is an underappreciated opportunity for many ag dealers. Mm-hmm. It's a big category for dealers in some of the other industries. Construction, forklifts, material handling, things like that. But I don't think agriculture has embraced it quite as strongly.
Yeah. Well, I think
there are issues that you need to watch. Some are safety issues. Some are, what the lifespan of that equipment is, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And I know timeliness, because I've talked to my dad about this quite a bit, of, is this a viable business model? And he's farmed 50 years, and he's like, no, you need to get the crop in the ground. You need to get the crop out of the ground. When you need it, everyone else needs it. But I would say that as technology's really come along, we can plant, if the weather's good, in a week. And fall has really extended the harvest season. And so I think there's more and more opportunity now that technology is better. You can drive later into the night with auto steer. And so I think it's becoming more and more of a viable option. But I agree with you. I don't see it in many ag equipment dealerships' business models. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this episode of Beyond the Hood with Tractor Zoom and our conversation with George Keane. Now, keep in mind that this is a part of a 3-part series. The next part, we will be talking about change management tips and looking forward to the future. Also, if you're not sure on how Tractor Zoom is already helping its partners have better data utilization and using that data to have effective used inventory management strategies, go on over to TractorZoomPro.com and you can learn more there.